back with Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote, where we're laser focused on the New York City mayoral election. And joining me now to discuss the bigger picture is Ryan Clancy, spokesperson for the No Labels movement. Ryan, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so for people who aren't familiar, maybe, please just first explain what No Labels is and what the purpose of your organization is.
So No Labels has been around for about 15 years, trying to advocate for America's common sense majority, combat this crazy partisanship that's so frustrating to so many of us. I mean, much of our work has been in Congress, where we're trying to build trust among Democrats and Republicans so they can solve problems. We're still doing that. Some people know us for our ballot access effort. Last year, we were trying to get on presidential ballots to put a unity ticket up. But there are some local races that we think have national implications, and the race for New York City mayor certainly qualifies.
Without a doubt. Beyond it having national implications, why is this race important to No Labels, and what role do you see No Labels playing? Because you're not on the ballot.
Because sometimes there are races that get nationalized, and this, of course, is a great example, that have implications well beyond what happens here. And our concern is that we are trying to create a situation where Democrats and Republicans actually have some space to work together. In a world in which Mamdani wins in November, we already have Democratic consultants and folks on the far left saying this is a blueprint. Other Democrats need to do this. And so come 2026, we will get people who are like Zohran Mamdani, who are running for Congress and offices up and down at various levels. And we don't think that's a good development for the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. I say that as someone who came up in the party. Mm-hmm. Or the country.
Well, sure. But if, let's say, Mamdani wins in New York, what's the case that he's not right for New York, whereas some other kinds of Democrats would be right for other parts of the country?
Hey, if he wins in November, then he will, by definition, be, as far as the voters are concerned, right for New York. But I think we have to remember that up until now, he has run 500,000 votes in a Democratic primary held in the middle of June on a 100-degree day. There's 5.7 million voters in New York. And so the election in November is going to be very different than the one that happened in late June.
Yeah, and we've been making this point. He won a 16th of the voting eligible population in New York City, and a general election could be very different from a primary. We'll have to see. He's still ahead in the polls. So you asked your members to help defeat Mamdani by contributing to Andrew Cuomo's campaign. You wrote in an email to supporters, Mamdani could seriously harm a great city and the prospects for bipartisan cooperation across America. Andrew Cuomo is not a perfect candidate, but No Labels is proud to stand with him. We believe he is the only Mamdani alternative with a viable path to victory, and that his win would mark a significant win for common sense and a setback for the far left. Ryan, just explain first the viable path, given that Cuomo lost in the primary and then had to become an independent to stay in the race, and he's still polling behind Mamdani.
Yeah. Well, it starts with what we said earlier, which is the election we're going to have in November is going to be very different from the one in June. Not only the composition, but the fact there's just going to be a lot more people. Number two, you look at like the Real Clear polling average, which aggregates a bunch of different polls. And right now it's at Mamdani 35, Cuomo's at 22, and then Sliwa and Adams come in 3 and 4. So that's not on its own an insurmountable lead. Mm-hmm. And look, frankly, because Mamdani had the advantage of really not being taken that seriously early on in the campaign, I think there was a lot about his background that hasn't been litigated yet. Yeah. And that when it gets out there more, that's going to have some real vulnerabilities for him.
Yeah, I think you could be right. If New Yorkers, though, if they feel betrayed by Andrew Cuomo over any number of scandals, why is No Labels telling those same voters to essentially get over that because Mamdani is so bad?
Yeah. So I live in New York. I would never presume to tell any New Yorker to do anything because they will just do the opposite.
Yeah, that's how you do know New Yorkers.
Yeah. So look, we're not telling anybody in New York to do anything. What we want people to do is focus on the stakes of what's really happening here. I think one of the things that gets lost sometimes is that you can lose a city that can really happen. That as frustrated as people are right now about the inequality and the costs, and Mamdani is right about those as
Yeah.
problems. If you get a couple big things wrong, you can destroy a city. And here's what the two big things are. If you don't take crime
Yeah.
seriously, and if you chase out your taxpayers, you get yourself into a spiral from which you will not recover. And this isn't theoretical. This just happened in San
Right.
Francisco. About 10 years ago, they got a progressive district attorney, a very progressive mayor, and only now have they dug out of the mess that was created by a lot of those policies by electing more common sense leaders for the mayoral and district attorney position.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We remember Chesa Boudin was ousted pretty summarily,
Right.
and that's happened repeatedly over several big cities from Chicago to San Francisco to LA. Ryan, stay right there because I've got a lot more that I want to talk to you about. We'll be right back with more Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. Back here on Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote, one more time with Ryan Clancy, spokesperson for the No Labels movement. Ryan, for centrists like me, there's a strong desire to move the parties back to the moderate middle. Isn't that a project that has to begin, though, with the primaries and the primary system, which incentivizes extreme candidates?
I mean, that's a huge part of it. I mean, when we look at why is it that we have a Congress that is so completely out of touch with where most of the electorate is, it begins and ends in the primaries. And of course, that problem gets worse when you have some of the redistricting shenanigans that have gone on both sides. Texas is only the latest offender, but it just makes more and more districts safe for one party or the other. The primaries become the only election that matters, and these very low turnout races determine the representation for everyone else.
Yeah, and every 2 or 4 years, I know a lot of voters are like, "How did we get here?" I mean, it starts earlier than on election day.
It does.
And I don't have to tell you this, the country's very frustrated with the two-party system. We know from polling that a majority of voters feel like they're not being represented fairly by the left or the right, and that the parties have moved too far to their flanks. What's the No Labels prescription?
Well, I mean, look, there's no shortage of good ideas out there, and there's plenty of good candidates out there that actually represent what most voters are looking for on issues like immigration and affordability and the like, including in the Democratic Party, like a Jared Golden, a Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, a Josh Shapiro, a Steve Beshear. That is the path to the Democrats getting back to national relevance for a lot of reasons, and we can talk about more in a bit. Going down the Mamdani path, which is certainly where the progressive wing of the party wants to
Right.
go, is a dead end, not just for the city, but for the country, to the extent that Democrats across the country copy this as a blueprint.
But isn't there a risk in nationalizing this? If you make Mamdani the boogeyman here, and he
Yeah.
wins, how does that help you in future races where lots of younger progressive Democrats are trying to do the exact same thing he is, which is
Yeah.
take on older establishment status quo
Sure.
candidates?
So I want to make really clear, we're not making Mamdani a boogeyman. And I don't care what Donald Trump has to say about Mamdani. And I think New Yorkers shouldn't care because the mayor of New York is not running to be the leader of the resistance against Donald Trump. The mayor of New York is running to be an executive of a city with 300,000 people. And the concerns with Mamdani have to do with not just the radicalism of his ideas. When you look at his affiliations with the Democratic Socialists of America, they want to nationalize industries and all kinds of ideas that actually are affiliated with communism. Put that aside for a
Okay.
second. Just focus on the ideas in his campaign. Rent control is the best example. This is an idea, this is his signature housing idea, Mamdani's. It fails everywhere it's tried. Like, this is not a lab experiment and we're like, well, we're frustrated and maybe this will work. It fails. And this isn't me saying this. This is every economist. This is Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize winner from the New York Times, said the fact that rent control is bad is one of the best understood and least controversial ideas in all of economics. Sweden actually had this nationally, and an economist did a study of it, and he said rent control is the best way to destroy a city except for bombing. Because what it does is it destroys the economic incentives to invest in buildings, to improve them. And so what that makes you ask is, if Mamdani thinks an idea this provably awful is good, then what else does he think is a good idea? Because that's got to be the concern here.
Yeah.
Forget about Trump for a second. The national implications is, what is he going to do to the quality of life in New York? And my concern as a New Yorker is that the things he says he cares most about doing, making things more affordable for people, helping people in poverty get a way out, that it's going to make all those things worse.
You know, I get you. And I'm reminded, you know, economists had a lot to say about Donald Trump's tariffs too. And I happen to agree with what they said, that tariffs are a tax on Americans and trade wars are bad. But I'm not sure his voters care. In a similar way, I'm not sure New Yorkers who are just starving for change really care about what economists have to say. He's picking the right issue in a way that Trump picked the right issues. How do you get around the fact that for a lot of voters, feelings don't care about your facts?
Well, because I would ask people to think about, and this gets to the point we talked about earlier, how you can break a city. Like, look, I've been living in New York City on and off, mostly on, since the early 2000s. And if you came up in New York City at any point during that time, you came up in a city where crime was almost always low.
Sure.
It was safe.
I did. Yeah.
People have no idea that 35 years ago, there were 2,200 murders a year in the city, and now there's less than 400. And that's a direct consequence of decisions made by our mayors. So that's another area where Mamdani, you look at how hostile he's been to police. You look at the Midtown shooting we had a couple weeks ago, and come to find out the special police unit that responds to that responds to terrorist attacks, Mamdani wanted to disband it. So I really would just ask people, as a fellow New Yorker, forget Trump, forget the name calling, look really specifically about the ideas he's proposing, where they've been tried, and over again, you're going to find that they have failed, often catastrophically.
Well, yeah, and this is the kind of criticism that Mamdani needs to hear and address, because as you've pointed out, he turned out a smallish amount of New Yorkers to vote in the primary, and now the stakes are much higher. So I'm sure he'll have to answer a lot of questions about these specific policy issues. And I'm really glad you came on to lay it all out and, talk about where no label sits in the middle of all of this. Really interesting. Ryan Clancy, thanks so much for coming on.